Welcome to the Growth Mindset podcast. Today I have Karen Stefano on the podcast with me. Your book, What the Body Remembers, which is your chronicling of the journey that you had from your life after experiencing sexual assault, which is an interesting and deep book to be going into. So yes, we're here to talk about your life, I guess. Very welcome here on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Sam. I'm happy to be on the Growth Mindset podcast.
Cool. So can you just briefly introduce us to like a very short overview of your life, if possible, like a 3-minute?
So I'm a unique person in the sense that I have seen and lived inside the American criminal justice system from literally every angle. When I was a college student at UC Berkeley in Berkeley, California, I worked for the police department, and I wore a cop uniform and I patrolled streets and I had the cop radio and I had all of that police training. I was not a full-blown police officer, so I didn't have the gun, but for all intensive purposes, I worked for a law enforcement agency. Then walking home one night after a shift, having changed back into my regular 19-year-old sophomore clothes and with my lavender backpack walking home, I was assaulted at knife point outside my apartment. My assailant was charged. He was charged with attempted rape. I was not raped. It was an attempted rape and assault with a deadly weapon. And he was also charged with false imprisonment. And I then saw the criminal justice system from the point of view as a victim and testifying at preliminary hearings against my attacker, testifying at jury trial as the victim. And then I went to law school after college, and my intention was to become a prosecutor and to put away the bad guys. And that's not what happened. I ended up seemingly paradoxically becoming a criminal defense attorney, defending people accused of crimes, some as heinous as the one committed against me. And then throw that into the mix, other work experience, working for a federal judge in San Diego in a very busy district with a docket that was mostly criminal cases. And at one point in my life, almost having been charged with a crime myself and going through that process. So that's part of my story. That's my life story. Part of that is what the book is about. The book is obviously primarily focused on the assault and its aftermath, and then the excavation I did literally 30 years after the assault when the PTSD had come back. And I tracked down my attacker and discovered some life-altering things about him. And that's what the book's about.
So before the attack, you had been planning to go into law though, right?
Even before the attack, I had planned to go to law school. I was a psychology major as an undergrad, but the plan was definitely to go to law school.
Cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed psychology. So you never wanted to stay in psychology and do kind of those sort of things?
I did initially when I declared the major, and then I got into it and I thought, well, this is really interesting, but is this what I want to do for my career on a day-to-day basis? And do I want to go to medical school so that I have the psychiatry certification rather than simply the psychologist certification? And I didn't want to go to med school.
So at the time, this was before the Me Too movement and stuff.
Oh yeah,
So
long before.
how do you think that sort of relates now to like the context of that, as in that you like learned a lot of things that could help now with what's been going on, or?
Absolutely. When I started researching and writing this book in 2014, and as I told more and more women what I was writing about, I heard more and more people say, yeah, something like that happened to me too. And those were the words they used. And this was way before the hashtag Me Too movement. But in talking to these women and hearing their stories about what happened to them, I felt that there was a sense of unburdening, if you will, and having them share with me their story. And that sort of reinforced for me that this is a story that needs to be told. And now, post hashtag Me Too, I believe the story's even more relevant. And what it means to come forward as the quote unquote victim, and what it means to do the personal transformation, which is a very personal process to transform from victim into survivor.
It feel like the whole time you're doing the prosecution, sort of having to come forwards as the victim, like repeatedly?
I had a really awful experience. Times have changed in our criminal justice system. My assault happened in the 80s. Things have definitely improved. And here's part of the irony. There are so many ironies and paradoxes in the story in my book. Even though I worked for a law enforcement agency, I had only a really vague and television informed sense of what happened in the criminal justice system post arrest. And so here I am, this naive 19-year-old girl child, and I get this crash course on the American criminal justice system, a crash course that I didn't have time for. I was still trying to go about my life and study for my classes and get decent grades and still work my law enforcement job so that I could pay my rent, and has the potential to be a really, really traumatic process. And like I say, it's gotten much better, but it could still be improved for anyone participating in the criminal justice system, whether you're a victim, whether you're representing someone who's been charged with a crime. And the thing that can be improved consistently is communication. It's incredibly anxiety inducing to not know what happens next. And if you're a prosecutor, I feel that you have an obligation to act as an advocate for the victim whose case you are taking to trial, and communicate with that victim. And as a criminal defense lawyer, you obviously have an obligation to communicate with your client and tell them, hey, here's what happens next. You're going to be able to post bail, and you're going to get out of jail, and then you're going to come back to court, and this is what happens. And then there'll be a plea bargain. If we don't like the plea bargain, we go to trial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But just communication, telling people what to expect next. And in my experience as a victim of a sexual assault, nobody ever communicated with me. The DA was incredibly incommunicative. I was told at the last minute, hey, you need to come testify at jury trial next week. And I was like, I can't do that. I have classes and I'm working my butt off to get my grades up. And, their response was in so many words, tough shit. So that didn't help the experience for me.
I can imagine it being kind of almost sort of like imposter syndrome or something, where you feel like perhaps everyone's going to think that you're just making it up or something, and then it's just going to be like 5 times worse.
It's interesting that you bring up the phrase imposter syndrome, because one of the things that I experienced post assault was not giving myself permission to feel the trauma. I pushed everything down, which in retrospect was not a healthy way to deal with the assault. But I kept telling myself, nothing happened, nothing happened. You weren't even hurt, and you weren't raped. And so get over it, and had really, really damaging self-talk. And only over the course of years have I realized how damaging that was. And when I've been on tour and talking about this book, people have asked me frequently, what do you tell someone who's experienced a sexual assault? And I tell them, do the opposite of everything that I did. Watch yourself talk. Don't tell yourself, I'm losing my mind, I'm going crazy. Shift your self talk to something that's more gentle and more loving. And tell yourself, not, I'm going crazy. Tell yourself, something horrible happened. And this is going to be really tricky to navigate and uncomfortable. And it's going to take some time, but I will get through this. I will not feel this fear for the rest of my life.
What do you think you'd have done if you were sexually assaulted a few years later?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I guess it would depend upon the circumstances of my assault were man jumps out of the bushes and attacks you, knife point. And many sexual assault survivors' story is being the victim of a sexual assault via someone they know. And I think that impacts how you process the assault. And I've spoken obviously to many, many sexual assault survivors. And something that's very alarming and interesting to me is the tendency to engage in self-blame. Like, oh, in a date rape situation, oh, I was drinking, or oh, I didn't fight back enough. And when the real issue should be, he shouldn't have done that. Stop the self-blame. And I think that that's part of rape culture in our society. There's a tendency for people to victim blame and to not believe women. That's shifting gears a little bit. That's why the Harvey Weinstein verdict was so heartening. There were no police witnesses. The jurors unanimously believed these women, and based on these women's words only. And I didn't expect it to happen. I was stunned. I was thrilled, but I was joyfully surprised.
Yeah, that was one piece of good news. I mean, bad that it happened, but at least
what I always say too, obviously having been a criminal defense attorney, I believe in due process. I believe in crimes, punishments being proportional to crimes. And you have the right to cross-examine your accusers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what's so disturbing to me is to see these wealthy, privileged men manipulate the justice system in their favor. And I certainly thought that that's how was going to be the outcome of the Weinstein case. And like I said, I've never been so happy to be wrong in my life.
The whole moral issue. How do you work out what is proportionally punishing to what the offense was?
I think it's a case by case basis. I want to throw out the example of Senator Al Franken, who was a former comedian and was shamed into resigning his Senate seat over a silly photograph. And people in the U.S. have called that political malpractice. That this man, this excellent representative, should be called upon to resign his Senate seat for a silly photograph that wasn't even an assault, that was taken years and years ago. So that's an example. To me, there will be people listening to this podcast who disagree with me. I don't think that's proportional.
Yeah, it's weird, as in from like the kind of Buddhist sort of belief or something, like every moment you're like a new person, and like you can learn and change instantly if it so happens, so you might never need to actually take any punishment to sort of be a good person that society needs you to be in some ways. But I guess it also serves as prevents other people from wanting to do these things. Well, it sort of makes a demonstration that you shouldn't do it if you see that you can't get away with it, I guess. But it's confusing, especially when it's something from like a long time ago. And I was perfectly a bit of an idiot when I was young anyways. And if I got arrested now for something I did then, it would seem quite wrong if it's something that I just would never do anymore, even though at the time I probably deserved to be punished for it. It's weird.
I mean, there's no doubt these are complicated issues that we are going to have to grapple with as a society as we try to change what's known as rape culture, what's okay and what's not okay. And I think we're working on that as a society now, trying to change older generations' beliefs in the quote unquote boys will be boys excuse. And, you know, when your son comes home after losing at lacrosse and saying, you know, oh, I got totally raped, and saying, whoa, that's not cool. You don't talk like that. And not that long ago, these weren't conversations that we were having. And so that's a wonderful thing about the Me Too movement. That's a wonderful thing about the Weinstein verdict. That's I hope a wonderful thing about books and stories like mine is that they're helping us have a greater cultural conversation.
Well, change your mind from wanting to sort of someone like putting people away to becoming a criminal defense attorney, because that seems like a bit of a mind shift change.
Yeah, for sure. And this is something again that I address directly in the book, but like most things in this life, it was pure chance. I had clerked in the San Diego District Attorney's office. And in that jurisdiction, when you serve as a law clerk, you're pretty much guaranteed an offer as a deputy district attorney. But then I had all these student loans to pay. And so I didn't take a position as a deputy district attorney. I took a position with a civil law firm, was miserable immediately, and tried to get the job back with the district attorney's office. But this was like in the 90s, and the economy was in the toilet, and there was a hiring freeze. And things just got worse and worse for me. I quit my job at the civil firm because I was so miserable, and then I couldn't pay my rent. And here I am, like this law school graduate, and I had to move back in with my parents, and I felt like such a loser. And I knew some criminal defense lawyers, and they said, hey, you know, make some court appearances for me, ghost write my briefs if you just need some money. And I started doing it, and I started interacting with the clients, and I started seeing their humanity, and I started seeing that so many prosecutors see things as black and white. There's the right way and there's the wrong way, and there's no gray areas in between, and there's no forgiveness. And really, it was just meeting the clients, and then I started getting my own clients. Most of the work that I did was public defense work. I was in private practice, but took cases that the public defender's office couldn't handle because they were so overloaded. And so it just built and built and built. And the reason I stayed on that side was seeing the gray areas, was seeing that people make mistakes. And most of the people who I represented, 99.9% of my clients, were the poorest, least educated, no safety net in sight members of society. And these were people who had no one looking out for them, no one fighting for them. And again, this is something I talk about in the book, but that's how I sort of found my voice. I found my voice advocating for these downtrodden people who had committed some pretty atrocious acts, but for whom I still saw their humanity. So that is a really perhaps jumbled summary of how I went from prosecute them, put them away, to wait a second, there are some gray areas here, and these are human beings, and these are human beings with legal rights.
Yeah. Which kind of goes back to this philosophical subject earlier about how like you can completely change as a person. Of like you can have this one
Right.
mindset and be like, actually, a few years later you can be a completely different person because of how you
Right.
operate and the things you think. Yeah, it's funny how like sort of the things life threw at you that you wouldn't have maybe chosen to do out of principle actually then sort of steered you into seeing a different way. When you do the things you think you want to do, you never really open yourself up to the opportunities of the things that are kind of out there. You know what I mean? As in, like, you wouldn't have chosen to do the thing that actually ended up being like a bigger calling for you, perhaps. If you try and read the news that's the opposite to what you think, and you try and talk to people that maybe have different opinions to you, that's where you learn a lot more about like why you might be wrong, how the world kind of really works, compared to just only ever seeing things in your own view. Some other things that you had to talk about was how do women sort of more come forward, and because it's important for them to share their stories, but how do they first go about that process, because it can be quite hard?
It's a very personal process, and every woman is going to navigate it in her own way. It's well known that many sexual assaults aren't reported for a variety of reasons. There are costs, emotional costs in coming forward, and it's pretty interesting that so many victims have been criticized for not coming forward to legal authorities immediately following an assault. And my response to that is, I came forward immediately. I scrambled up from the ground, and as my attacker ran inside my apartment and called 911, he was detained immediately, and he was still acquitted and let go. And I underwent a lot of emotional strain and re-trauma for nothing. And so when people say, oh, why, how can you believe someone who doesn't come forward immediately? My response is sort of snarky, and it's that I came forward seconds later, and look where it got me. But that's something that where we're growing as a society in terms of rape myths. It's a myth that if a woman doesn't come forward immediately, it didn't happen.
Yeah, it's a really confusing time.
Yeah. And again, though, I mean, we're having these difficult conversations as a culture, and I'm just happy to see that we're having the conversation. But I'll share with you a personal story on that note. My neighbor, she was in her 70s, and after having read my book, she felt comfortable telling me, and she'd never told anyone, that she was sexually assaulted as a child by one of her mother's boyfriends. And that's just a stunning thing. And, we could sit here and talk to her for hours saying, why didn't you ever tell anyone? And for any woman, I think the answer is going to be different. It's going to be very, very personalized. But I was very touched that after having read my book, she felt comfortable enough with me, in spite of our factual circumstances being so different, but that she felt comfortable coming forward and saying, yeah, again, going back to what I'd said before, something like that happened to me too. And, that's the other important part of sharing our stories, is that we empower others to come forward and share their stories.
Yeah, definitely. It's around the time the meeting movement happened. Me and my friend, where we'd gone to Japan on business, and like our boss's boss had kind of done some things that he really shouldn't have done, and like we'd never really done anything about it since. But then we did have a conversation like, should we do something? And but we figured it was like 5 years later, and yeah, maybe we shouldn't bother. but it did make us like think about it again, and like realize that actually that was really weird and you shouldn't have done that at all. And yeah, I mean, a bit of another story that we didn't actually then go forward. But we sort of thought about like how we would even do it, which we hadn't even like contemplated as a possibility before, I guess. Which maybe if something had been like a bit worse, we've gone like one step further, then it probably would have
Yeah,
very helpful
and,
for
and
others.
again, I mean, things are changing, and it's becoming easier for men to intercede and tell other men, you know,
Mm.
stop.
Yeah, it's a hard one. But I think it's, well, hard to know the effects. I don't know if you look at the statistics, if it has sort of had an impact on the amount of men doing these things, or and women. I mean,
Yeah,
I've been abused by women twice as well, more
yeah,
than I have
right,
by
right.
men.
Men are sexual assault victims. Men are raped. It's not only women, but the vast majority of the victims are women, and it is so hard too when so many incidents are unreported.
Definitely. Kind of like the whole issue we have going on with COVID-19 about not having enough testing. We don't really know what's going on, and people need to self-report more and stuff. And yeah, it would
Yeah,
be much easier to work out what's really going on if we had like the data on everything.
right, right.
Okay, so I have a few like final questions that I like to ask.
Okay.
What is one of the earliest memories that you have that's like distinct?
I don't have anything specific. I have kind of a combo of memories of being a small child in my family home,
Yeah.
and my parents being around, my grandmother being around, and it's not a
Mm.
specific memory. It's just a general scene of domesticity,
Yeah.
and
So
all
like
the
a warm
underlying.
nostalgic feeling of like you would like to go back to it? Or?
Well, yeah, it is warm, but no one's childhood is perfect.
Mm.
And there's, even in a happy childhood, there's always underlying currents. I had a very happy, uneventful childhood, but my mother, because of her very difficult childhood, suffered from anxiety issues. And that was definitely transmitted to me. And it's interesting, there's an undercurrent in my book, What a Body Remembers. There's very much an undercurrent of the mother-daughter theme there too. So again, it's interesting that you bring that up.
Then what's one of the kindest things that someone's done for you?
Really simple things. I think sharing a smile. Just the other day, obviously we're on COVID-19 lockdown, but we're still allowed to go outside and exercise, but we're all social distancing. And I was just walking down this path and just had eye contact with a woman, and we shared a smile. I mean, that's happened to me many times. It's something I share in the book. There was a judge at my assailant's preliminary hearing, and I'm there testifying, and I'm terrified. And the female judge, I'll never forget it. I mean, she just sort of looked at me and smiled at me. And it was just like such a simple act of kindness. And maybe it sounds trite, but just sharing a smile and eye contact with another human being, I think, is one of the most intimate and kind things that you can do.
Definitely. Nice. So always helps brighten people's day, I think, and it doesn't really cost you anything, but can make a big difference.
I have to turn it back at you. What's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
I guess when people sort of believe in you before you're ready, kind of thing, as in when you get trusted to do something that you haven't proven that you're capable of, but you become capable by being tested on it. And I think you grow so much faster, and it really helps build your courage to do things that you didn't think you could do. I think that's one of the best things that people can ever do, have ever done for me.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. And again, something, it doesn't cost you anything to do that, and
Mm. Well, I
to
mean,
tell you.
sometimes they can risk
Yeah,
things
yeah,
if you
yeah,
like.
yeah. That's true. That's true. But
But often it really doesn't. You're like, oh, as in sometimes it's just like people telling you that you should do something when you didn't think it, as well as in like saying, hey, you'd be really good at this, I didn't think you were, or something to the same effect. Yeah, but yeah, I like kindness. It's nice to spread some suggestions for it, have it in
I like
people's
it.
brains, ready to be more kind in their daily lives. So thank you very much for the interview, and I hope you have a lovely day, and best of luck with whatever you go on to do in the next rest of your life.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Sam. I appreciate you having me on the podcast.